My father texted me a photograph of a deed on a Sunday evening. He texted it to me specifically, not to my brother, not to my sister, just to me, with a message that said, "I thought you should see this," and then nothing else. The deed was a warranty deed. It showed my father as grantor and my brother Owen as grantee, dated 14 months earlier, signed and notarized and appearing to bear the Stark County Recorder's filing stamp. My father was still alive. He had sent me this himself. I called him. He said he had found I want to describe the 10 minutes after my father sent the photograph. He had sent it with the message, "I thought you should see this," and I read that message, and I opened the photograph, and I looked at the deed, and I read the date, and I understood it before I had fully understood everything it implied. November 14th. I am a financial analyst, and I work with timelines and data sequences, and the relationship between events and dates is my professional daily work. I read November 14th, and I thought of November. November was the cardiac event. November was Cleveland Clinic. November was 2 weeks of the family taking turns sitting with my father in a hospital room while we waited to understand what his prognosis was. November 14th was a specific day within that period, and I had been at Cleveland Clinic on November 14th, and I knew my father had been there because I had been in his room and because I had sent a photograph from his room to the family group chat on that date. I held the phone for a moment and then I called him. He said he had found the deed in Owen's desk. I said, "I am handling this." I went to the Stark County Recorder's website. I found the deed. I noted the recording date. I called Sandra's office. I left a message. She called me back within the hour. I also want to say something about the specific quality of the recognition I had when I read the deed date. It was not gradual. It was immediate. I work in financial analysis, and I have spent my career training myself to read a sequence of numbers and see the one that does not belong. The date was the number that did not belong. I had been at Cleveland Clinic on November 14th. I had photographs on my phone from November 14th. I had been in my father's room on November 14th. The date on the deed was a date I knew by experience, and the experience told me the date was wrong. This is the professional version of the recognition, but the personal version arrived immediately after it. The personal version was the understanding of what my brother had done while our father was in a hospital bed in Cleveland. I held both versions at once. The professional one drove the response. The personal one is still with me. It in Owen's desk when he was helping Owen move some boxes, and he had taken a photograph of it with his phone, and he had sent it to me because he did not know what it meant and he was afraid. He said he did not remember signing it. He said 14 months ago was November, and in November he had been in Cleveland Clinic receiving treatment for the cardiac event that had required 2 weeks of inpatient care, and that we had all been terrified of at the time, and that had changed how we all thought about his health. He said he could not have been in Stark County signing a deed in November because he had been in a hospital bed at Cleveland Clinic in November. He said he wanted to know if he was right about this. I said he was right. I said, "I will handle this. I am a financial analyst. I want to explain what the Stark County Recorder's portal shows when you search a property and why the combination of the deed's execution date and recording date matters." The portal shows the complete deed history for a property, including the type of instrument, the parties, the execution date as stated in the document, and the recording date, which is the date the instrument was filed with the recorder's office. In a normal deed transaction, the execution date and the recording date are close together, sometimes the same day, usually within a few weeks. You sign the deed and you record it shortly after because recording is what protects the ownership. When I searched my father's name and found the deed, I saw 2 dates. The execution date of November 14th and the recording date of November 22nd. Both of these dates fell within my father's inpatient period at Cleveland Clinic. Not one of the dates, but both of them. He had been admitted November 8th and discharged November 24th. The execution date was 8 days after he was admitted. The recording date was 2 days before he was discharged. The entire chain of the deed's alleged existence occurred while my father was in a hospital in Cleveland. This was not a deed with an anomalous date. This was a deed with an impossible date. The portal showed me this in about 3 minutes. Records and timelines and the relationship between dates and events for a living. And what my father had just described to me was a timeline contradiction of the clearest possible kind. A deed executed in Stark County on a date when the grantor was admitted as an inpatient to Cleveland Clinic, 140 miles away, cannot have been executed on that date. 140 miles is a fact. An inpatient admission is a documented fact. A deed date is a recorded fact. When those three facts are placed in sequence, two of them describe where my father was, and one of them describes where he was allegedly signing a legal document. And the two that describe where he actually was are supported by hospital records, and he remembers being there, and everyone in the family remembers being at the hospital with him, and I have the photograph I took of him in the hospital bed that I sent to the family group chat at the time. I want to tell you what happened before I searched the Stark County Recorder's portal. I sat with my phone for about 10 minutes, and I called the hospital's patient records line, and I confirmed that they had admission records for my father from November of 14 months ago, and that the records could be requested through the medical records office. Then I went to the Stark County Recorder's website. The Recorder's online portal for Stark County allows you to search recorded instruments by name or parcel number, and the results show the complete deed history for a property. I searched my father's name. I found the deed. It was there, recorded in November 14 months ago, 2 days before my father was discharged from Cleveland Clinic. The recording date was inside the window of his hospital admission. He had been an inpatient at Cleveland Clinic on the recording date, which meant he had been an inpatient at Cleveland Clinic on the date the deed was supposedly executed and signed, because you execute a deed before you record it, and the execution date on the deed was November 14th, and the recording date was November 22nd, and Cleveland Clinic's records would show my father present at their facility for the entire period between those dates. Before I go on, if this story connects with something real in your life, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely feel it. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. My name is Petra. I am 36 years old. And this is the story of how a Cleveland Clinic inpatient admission record, a Stark County Recorder's deed entry, and a 140-mile distance between a hospital room and a county courthouse established, with complete clarity, the impossibility of a deed that my brother had created and recorded while our father was lying in a hospital bed in Cleveland, and what happened when an attorney named Sandra Kowalczyk put those two dates and that distance in front of a judge in Stark County Common Pleas Court. Now let me take you back to the beginning, not the Sunday evening text. Before that, to the house in Plain Township in Stark County, Ohio that my father had owned for 27 years and that he had purchased when my youngest sibling was born, and that had been, for the 27 years since, the house where the family had gathered and where the holidays had been held and where the specific accumulation of 27 years of a family's presence was visible in every room. Stark County is in northeast Ohio, east of Akron, and north of Canton, and Plain Township is a township in the northern part of the county with the specific character of a place that is suburban without being entirely urban, where the houses have enough land around them to give families the outdoor space they use across the decades of children growing up and grandchildren visiting. My father's house had a yard that had been shaped by 27 years of his specific attention, the garden beds he had built, and the tree he had planted when the youngest was born, and the fence he had replaced in sections as it needed replacing, always maintaining what he had built because he was a person who maintained things. My father's name is Leonard. He is 68. He is alive. He is the person who sent me the photograph on the Sunday evening. He is, as of the date of this recording, still living in the house in Plain Township because the deed that Owen had recorded has been voided by the Stark County Common Pleas Court, and the house is in my father's name where it has always been and where he intends to continue living for as long as he is able. My father worked for 30 years at a steel fabrication company in Canton and retired at 62, and has occupied his retirement the way he occupied his working life, which is with consistent, purposeful activity and the specific refusal to become idle that characterizes people who have spent 3 decades doing work that required their full physical and mental engagement. Owen is my older brother. He is 40. I want to tell you about Leonard and about what kind of person he is, because understanding who he is helps you understand why he sent me the photograph and not anyone else. He is a person who is careful about what he does not understand and who tends to bring complicated things to the person he thinks is best positioned to understand them. He had worked in steel fabrication for 30 years, and he had been in that work the person who understood tolerances and specifications and who paid attention to the details that determined whether something was going to work. He applied this to everything. When something was not right, he noticed it, and he named it, and he brought it to the person who could address it. When he found the deed in Owen's desk and knew that he did not remember signing it and that November was the hospital period, He did what he always did with something that was not right. He documented it with the photograph, and he brought it to the person he trusted to know what to do with it. He knew what I did for work. He knew I worked with documents and timelines. He sent it to me. He was right to send it to me. I was the right person. He knew that. He always knows which person to bring a thing to. That is part of how he took care of things for 30 years in a job where things had to be right. I also want to say something about my father and Owen and the specific nature of the relationship between a parent and a child who has done something like this. My father had been genuinely worried about Owen for years and had been actively considering how to help him financially. The fact that Owen had chosen to exploit the period of the cardiac event, when the family had been gathered around him in a hospital, to create a fraudulent deed to his house, was a specific betrayal that my father has had to hold with the patience of someone who understands more than he can easily articulate about why a person he raised would do this to him. He has not resolved this yet. I do not think he will resolve it quickly. He sits with it the way he sits with things that do not have clean answers, which is to say steadily and without demanding that it resolve itself on a schedule. He works in the garden. He calls me on Tuesday evenings. He maintains the house. He is still the person who taught me to pay attention and to bring complicated things to the right person. That part of him is intact. The rest is a work in progress. It will get there. He always gets there. He had been in and out of financial difficulty for years and had moved back to Stark County from Columbus 2 years before the deed was recorded, in the period when our father's health had begun to require more direct attention than my sister and I could provide from our respective distances. He had been present at the hospital during the cardiac event in November and had been, in that period, the son who was there, which is a role that carries real weight in a family, and that Owen had occupied in ways that were both genuine and, as it turned out, directed toward purposes that were not entirely what they appeared to be. I called Sandra Kowalczyk the Monday after my father's text. She had been referred to me by a paralegal I know through professional contacts who said Sandra had been handling contested property matters in Stark County for 14 years, and that if the situation was what I described it to be, Sandra would be the right person for it. I described what I had found: the deed, the recording date, the Cleveland Clinic admission period, the 140-mile distance. Sandra said, "I want 2 things immediately." She said the Cleveland Clinic admission record showing the dates of admission and discharge, and my father's physical presence at the facility, and the Stark County Recorder's deed entry with the execution date and the recording date. I sent her the recorder's entry from the portal within the hour. She said, "Call the medical records office and request a certified copy of the admission record and have them note the specific dates of admission and discharge." I called the medical records office. They said the certified copy would take 3 to 5 business days. Sandra said that is fine. She said, "I am filing an emergency motion to void the deed and to stay any action Garrett or a subsequent buyer might take against the property while we establish the record." She said the timeline contradiction you have described is among the most straightforward grounds for voiding a deed that exists in Ohio property law. She said a deed cannot have been executed at a place and time where the alleged signatory demonstrably was not. She said, "We will show where he was." She filed an emergency motion in Stark. I want to say something about what Owen had been anticipating and what I think he thought would happen after he recorded the deed. Owen had recorded the deed 14 months before my father found it. He had kept it in his desk rather than asserting possession immediately. I think he was waiting for my father's health to deteriorate further and for the right moment to present the deed as evidence of an earlier transfer. He may have intended to produce it after my father died as a way of claiming the property had already been transferred and was not part of the estate. He may have intended to use it to pressure my father to confirm the transfer in a moment of vulnerability. He may have had other plans. None of them survived the moment my father opened a box in Owen's spare room and found the deed in the desk drawer and photographed it and sent it to me. My father found it by chance. The chance finding was what made the response possible. If Owen had kept it somewhere my father would not have opened, or if my father had not photographed it, or if he had not sent it to me specifically, the outcome might have been different. 3 things had to happen in sequence, and all 3 happened. The deed was found. The photograph was sent. I knew what the date meant. I also want to say something about the specific piece of luck that my father had been helping Owen move boxes rather than being in a less accessible part of Owen's home. Owen had kept the deed in his desk. My father had been helping him reorganize the desk area when the boxes needed moving. He had opened a drawer to check whether it needed to be emptied before the desk was moved. He had seen what was in the drawer. He had recognized his own name on the document as grantor. He had known something was wrong. He had photographed it and texted it to me before he finished helping Owen move the rest of the boxes. He did not say anything to Owen. He came home. He texted me. He said, "I thought you should see this." He had been right to text rather than confront. Confrontation would have given Owen the opportunity to hide or destroy the document. My father's instinct to photograph and send rather than confront was the correct instinct. He had 30 years of working with complicated situations in which documentation preceded discussion. The instinct held. The photograph is in my phone. The ruling is in the record. County Common Pleas Court requesting the deed be voided and that any further transfer or encumbrance of the property be stayed pending the court's review. She filed the motion on Tuesday. She submitted the deed and the recorder's entry and a sworn statement from my father describing his hospital admission and stating that he did not sign the deed and did not authorize anyone to sign on his behalf. She submitted a sworn statement from me describing the photograph my father had sent and the recorder's search I had conducted and the dates I had found. She submitted the dates of the Cleveland Clinic admission as known to us pending the certified records. She submitted the hospital's general records confirmation that records existed for the stated period. She requested an expedited hearing on the grounds that the property rights were at issue and that the evidence of fraud was documentary and verifiable. The certified admission records arrived 4 days later. They showed my father admitted to Cleveland Clinic's cardiac unit on November 8th, 14 months ago, and discharged on November 24th. The deed was executed, according to its own text, on November 14th. The recording date was November 22nd. My father had been an inpatient at Cleveland Clinic from November 8th through November 24th. Both the execution date and the recording date fell within the admission window. He had been in a hospital bed in Cleveland on November 14th, and he had been in a hospital bed in Cleveland on November 22nd. He had not been in Plain Township. He had not been anywhere near a notary public. He had not been in a position to sign anything except the consent forms the hospital had him signing for his treatment. Sandra submitted the certified admission records to the court. She submitted the specific notation in the record showing continuous inpatient status throughout the period, including November 14th and November 22nd. She submitted the 140-mile distance between Cleveland Clinic and the address of the property in Plain Township. She submitted a statement from the notary whose stamp appeared on the deed, a notary public in Canton who had submitted a sworn statement saying she had no record of notarizing any deed for Leonard on November 14th and that she had not been present at a signing of this document and that her stamp had been applied without her knowledge or consent. She submitted the family group chat photographs my sister had found, photographs from the hospital room taken during the admission period, including photographs from November 14th and November 17th, showing my father in the Cleveland Clinic cardiac unit in a hospital bed. Owen's attorney filed a response arguing that the deed was valid, and I want to say something about the Stark County prosecutor's investigation and what it means that Judge Brennan referred the matter. The referral was automatic in the sense that a judge who voids a deed for fraud is required to inform the prosecutor when the circumstances suggest criminal conduct. The circumstances here did more than suggest it. They documented it, a deed with a false date. A notary stamp applied without the notary's knowledge or consent. A grantor who was in a hospital bed on the alleged execution date. All of these things are in the record, and all of them are documented with the specific clarity of cases where the fraud was not hidden particularly well, but was rather assumed to be sufficient to accomplish the purpose without close examination. Owen had assumed that the deed would serve its purpose before anyone looked closely at the dates. My father had looked closely at the dates because he knew where he had been in November. The prosecutor is now looking at the dates. The dates are still what they are. They have not changed. They will not change. The distance is still 140 miles. The record is the record. Sandra said something to me after the ruling that I want to repeat. She said the cases where the fraud is most definitively established are the cases where the fraudulent document chose a date that the person who was targeted could specifically disprove. She said Owen had chosen November because it was a period of my father's health decline, and he may have believed that the health context would make the signing of documents seem plausible. She said he had not understood that the health context was the very thing that made the date impossible. My father had been sick in November. He had been sick in a hospital in Cleveland. He had not been home. He had not been available to sign anything. The health context that Owen had thought would provide cover was the health context that provided the hospital record. She said it was the most complete case of a fraudulent deed being undone by the circumstances it had tried to exploit. I agreed. The records of his illness saved his house. He would find that difficult to feel fortunate about, and I do not blame him. The outcome was correct. The path to it was terrible. Both things are true, had been signed by Leonard, and that the signature was genuine, and that any discrepancy in the dates was a clerical error that did not affect the validity of the transfer. The response was brief and the argument was thin, and Sandra's reply was direct. She said the alleged clerical error was not a matter of a wrong number in an address or an incorrectly spelled name. She said the execution date was November 14th. She said the admission record showed Leonard in continuous inpatient status at Cleveland Clinic from November 8th through November 24th. She said the execution date fell within the inpatient period. She said no clerical error produces a deed execution date that falls within an inpatient admission window at a facility 140 miles from the property. She said the deed's execution date was not wrong. She said the deed's entire premise was wrong. She said Leonard had not signed it. She said the notary had sworn she had not notarized it. She said the family photographs placed Leonard in the hospital on the execution date. She said there was no error to correct. There was a fraud to void. The Stark County Common Pleas Court assigned the matter to Judge Howard Brennan, who had been handling property and civil matters in Stark County for 11 years. He reviewed the submissions. He scheduled a hearing for 3 weeks after the emergency motion had been filed. At the hearing, he asked Owen's attorney whether the defense had any evidence that Leonard had been present in Stark County on November 14th. Any evidence at all. A witness, a receipt, a photograph, a phone record showing a call from a Stark County location. Any evidence that Leonard had been anywhere other than Cleveland Clinic's cardiac unit on that date. The attorney said he did not have such evidence available. Judge Brennan said he had reviewed the admission records and the deed and the photographs in the notary's statement, and he had reached a conclusion. He said the conclusion was not difficult to reach. He said a deed cannot have been signed at a location by a person who was, according to certified hospital records, admitted as an inpatient at a hospital 140 miles from that location on the date the deed was allegedly signed. He said the deed was void. He said the property remained in Leonard's name. He referred the matter to the Stark County prosecutor. My father is still in the house in Plain Township. He called me after that. I want to describe the hearing in Stark County Common Pleas Court and what the specific experience of sitting in the courtroom with my father was like. He had wanted to attend the hearing, and Sandra had said he could come if he felt well enough, and he had said he was going, and that was the end of the discussion. He sat next to me at the petitioner's table in the specific posture of a person who has every right to be in the room and who knows it. He was wearing the good jacket he wears when he wants to make a correct impression, which he had worn to the same jacket to my college graduation and to my sister's wedding and to the closing when he bought the house 27 years ago. He sat straight. He listened. When Judge Brennan asked Owen's attorney for evidence placing Leonard in Plain Township on November 14th and the attorney said he had none, I felt my father exhale beside me with the specific quality of someone releasing something he had been holding. He had known where he was on November 14th. He had known the record would confirm it. The confirmation still had weight when it came from a judge in a courtroom. After the ruling, Judge Brennan said the property remained in Leonard's name. My father said good under his breath. I heard it. Sandra heard it. We smiled. It was the correct reaction to a correct outcome. I also want to say something about what my father did after the hearing. Sandra had told him the ruling was what she had expected, and that the case was clean, and that he should feel confident that the house was his and would remain his. He had listened to this with the specific attention of someone who has been waiting a long time for a confirmation that they were right about something important. He said thank you in the direct way he thanks people, which is without excess and with genuine weight. Then he put his jacket on correctly. He said, I want to go home. We went home. He made lunch. He put on the afternoon news. He sat in the chair where he always sits. The house was his. He sat in it, ruling, and he said, thank you for handling this. And I said, you sent me the photograph. He said, yes. He said, I knew you would know what to do with it. I said, you were right. He said, I thought so. He was quiet for a moment. He said, do you think Owen thought I would not notice? I said, I think Owen was hoping you would not find the deed before he could do something with the house. He was quiet again. He said, I should have a better lock on my desk. I said, that is one approach. He said, well, He said, I suppose you take care of things you care about. I said, yes. I said, you taught me that. He said, I suppose I did. He said, I am going to go plant the garden now. It is a good day for it. I said, yes. I said, call me this evening. He said, I will. He did. I want to say something before I go. Not about Owen, and not about I want to say something about what you can do if you find yourself in a situation where a deed to a family member's property has been recorded with a date that may coincide with a period of documented absence or incapacity. The first thing is to search the county recorder's portal for the property and find the deed entry with its execution date and recording date. Then ask, where was the alleged grantor on those dates? If they were in a medical facility during any part of the execution period, request the certified admission records immediately. Call the medical records office directly. They will tell you how to request certified copies and how long it will take. Most hospitals can produce certified records within a week. Once you have them, compare the admission and discharge dates to the deed's execution date. If the execution date falls within the admission period, you have documentary evidence of physical impossibility. Combine this with the distance between the medical facility and the property. The greater the distance, the clearer the impossibility. 140 miles is unambiguous. Even 20 miles from an inpatient facility would be significant. Also look for family photographs from the period. Phone camera metadata records the date of every photograph. A family photograph from a hospital room on the deed's execution date is evidence that requires no expert interpretation. The photograph says where the person was. The deed says where they were supposed to be. The distance between those two places is the case. Hit the prosecutor. About the photograph my father sent me and about what it means that he sent it to me specifically and about the specific nature of what the hospital records established. The hospital admission record did something that almost no other piece of evidence can do in a property fraud case. It did not establish that the deed was implausible or that the signature was suspicious or that the circumstances were inconsistent with my father's stated intentions. It established that the deed was physically impossible. On the date the deed claimed my father had signed it, my father had been in a hospital bed at Cleveland Clinic, under continuous inpatient care, 140 miles away. You cannot be in two places at once. A deed that requires you to be in two places at once is not a deed that was signed on the date it claims. The hospital record said where he was. I want to say something about what a financial analyst knows about timelines that was directly applicable here. My work involves building financial models that track transactions and dates and sequences, and identifying anomalies in those sequences that indicate problems. An anomaly in a financial model is a number that does not fit the pattern established by the other numbers. The anomaly tells you where to look. When I looked at the deed and read November 14th, the anomaly was immediate. That date was inside a period I knew about from direct experience. The date did not fit the pattern of what I knew about November. In a financial model, you investigate the anomaly until you understand it. You do not accept the number and move on. You find out why the number is what it is. I found out why the date was what it was. It was what it was because Owen had chosen a date in November without knowing that November 14th specifically was a date for which my father had continuous documented presence at a facility 140 miles away. He had chosen November because my father had been in declining health during that period, and he may have thought the health context would give the date a certain plausibility. He had not anticipated that the health context was the very reason my father could not have been in Plain Township on any date in November. The anomaly told me everything. I followed the anomaly. That is what financial analysts do. The deed said where he was supposed to be. Those two places were 140 miles apart, and neither of them was a matter of interpretation. The distance is the distance. The records are the records. The deed was impossible. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story made you feel something, write it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to hear the story of a woman whose nephew had been using her late father's Medicare number to bill for home health services after the father died, and what the Medicare claims database and the county death record showed about the dates in the billing, it is waiting for you in the description below. Click it. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And if someone has recorded a deed to a family member's property and you have reason to believe the grantor could not have signed it on the stated date, the first question to ask is where the grantor actually was on that date. If the grantor was in a hospital, a rehabilitation facility, an assisted living center, or any other institution that maintains admission records, those records will show the dates of their presence. A deed executed at a property location on a date when the grantor was admitted as an inpatient at a facility elsewhere is a deed with a timeline that cannot be true. Request the certified records. Send them to the court. The distance between where the grantor was and where the deed says they were is the case. I want to tell you more about the cardiac event in November and about what it was like for the family during those 2 weeks, because the specific reality of that period is what makes the deed's claim date so completely impossible to anyone who was there. My father had been having chest discomfort for 2 days before he called my sister, and she had driven him directly to the emergency department at the nearest hospital in Canton, and they had transferred him to Cleveland Clinic by transport the same day because the situation was serious enough to require the cardiac specialty resources that Cleveland Clinic provided. I had driven from Columbus with my partner when we got the call, and we had been at the hospital for the first 3 days and had alternated visits with my sister and Owen for the 2 weeks of the admission. The family was present throughout. We had sat in the waiting room. We had sat in his room when he was stable enough for visitors. We had brought him things from home that he had asked for. We had spoken to the cardiologist. We had attended the family meetings about his treatment and his prognosis and the path forward. We had been at Cleveland Clinic as a family during those 2 weeks in November. We had been there on November 14th. We had photographs from November 14th. Owen had been there too. I want to describe what it felt like to understand, in the first few minutes after my father sent me the photograph, exactly what had happened. I am a financial analyst, and I spend my working days building timelines and identifying anomalies in data sequences, and the specific quality of the recognition I had was professional before it was personal, which is to say, I saw the date and I thought about where my father had been in November, and I understood what the date meant before I had processed what the implication was for my family. The date was November 14th. My father had been admitted to Cleveland Clinic on November 8th. I knew these two facts simultaneously, and the relationship between them was immediate and clear. The deed's date fell inside the admission period. The admission period was documented. The distance was 140 miles. I held the phone for a moment before I called my father, and the moment had the specific quality of a financial analyst identifying a discrepancy in a data set, which is the quality of clarity before consequence. The discrepancy was clear. The consequence was that my brother had created and recorded a fraudulent deed while my father was in a hospital bed in Cleveland and had held onto it for 14 months waiting to use it. I want to say something about the notary whose stamp appeared on the deed. Her name was Margaret Olson, and she was a notary public in Canton who had been commissioned for 4 years and who had no professional connection to Owen or to my family that anyone could establish. Owen had apparently obtained her commission information. I want to say something about Stark County and about Plain Township and about what the Northeast Ohio landscape looks like in this part of the state. Stark County is in the northeastern corner of Ohio, east of Akron and north of Canton, and it has the specific character of a place that was built around industry and that has maintained itself through the decades with the particular resilience of communities that have learned to find new forms when the old ones change. Canton is the county seat, and it has the texture of a mid-size Ohio industrial city, with the downtown and the surrounding townships that have grown around it over the decades. Plain Township is in the northern part of the county, and it has the specific quality of a township that was rural and has become suburban while still maintaining the character of a place where people have yards and gardens and where the houses have enough space around them to feel like individual places rather than units in a dense development. My father's house is in the part of Plain Township where the houses were built in the post-war decades and where the families who bought them have stayed. 27 years is not the longest tenure on his street. He knows his neighbors. The neighbors know him. The tree in the yard is 27 years old. The roots are deep. That is the kind of house this was worth protecting. I also want to say something about what it means that the house has been in the same family's care for 27 years and that the 27 years are visible in the house. The kitchen renovation is there. The garden is there. The workshop in the basement is there. The fence is there in the sections that have been replaced and in the sections that are original. The tree is there, 27 years old, and extending its canopy in the direction my father trained it. A house that has been occupied and tended for 27 years by one person who understood maintenance as a form of care is not just a property. It is the physical record of 27 years of someone's attention and intention. You can see it in the decisions that were made and the work that was done and the things that were planted and built and repaired. The house says who he is, the same way the filing cabinet in Vera's bedroom said who she was, and the kitchen drawer notebook in Dennis's farmhouse said who he was. The house is a record. It was worth protecting. It is protected. He is still there. He is still tending it. The record continues, which is public, and had used it to create a stamp, or had obtained access to her stamp by some other means, and had applied it to the deed without her knowledge. Margaret Olson had been contacted by Sandra as part of the investigation, and she had provided a sworn statement saying that she had not notarized any deed for Leonard on November 14th, that she had no record of any transaction with anyone named Leonard or with Owen, and that she had not been present at any signing of the document in question. She said the use of her stamp without her consent was something she had immediately reported to the Ohio Secretary of State's Notary Division when she was informed of it. She was not a party to the fraud. She was a victim of a different aspect of it. Her statement corroborated what the hospital records already established. The deed had not been notarized on November 14th in any legitimate sense because the grantor had not been in Canton on November 14th. I want to tell you about Sandra Kowalczyk and about what kind of attorney she is and what her 14 years of contested property work in Stark County gave her in terms of the understanding of how these cases develop. Sandra had a specific quality that I noticed from the first phone call, which is that she understood the structure of the case immediately and organized her approach around the central fact rather than around the peripheral details. She said the central fact is the hospital admission record. She said everything else is corroboration. She said when you have a fact that establishes physical impossibility, you lead with it, and you do not let the argument drift away from it. She said Owen's attorney would try to suggest clerical errors and alternative explanations, and she said the response to all of those attempts was the same, the admission record. She said 140 miles and a certified hospital record are not susceptible to clerical error explanations. She said we will hold to the central fact and let the court see that the alternative explanations require you to believe that Cleveland Clinic's records are wrong, that the dates my father remembers are wrong, that the photographs the family took are wrong, and that Margaret Olson's statement is wrong, all simultaneously. She said no court will reach that conclusion when one alternative explains all of it simply. The deed was not signed on November 14th because Leonard was not in Canton on November 14th. I also want to describe what the month between Sandra's filing and Judge Brennan's hearing was like for my father and for the family. My father was living in the house, and Owen had not attempted to change the locks or assert possession in any physical way, in part because the court's stay order made any such attempt legally untenable, and in part because I think Owen understood, once my father had found the deed and texted me the photograph, that the situation had changed from what it had been when he had imagined it going quietly. My father and Owen did not speak during this period. This was a silence that my father experienced with the specific sadness of a parent who has been forced to acknowledge something about a child that he had preferred not to know. He called me several times during the month, and our conversations had the quality of conversations with someone who is processing a large and unwelcome fact and who needs to talk through its implications in real time. He said once that he understood that Owen had been in financial difficulty and that he had thought about changing his will to give Owen a larger share specifically because Owen had been present during the hospital period. He said he had not done it yet because he had wanted to talk to his estate attorney first. He said he was glad he had not done it yet. I said yes. I said I am glad too. I want to say something about the family photographs from the hospital in November and about what it meant to have them available as evidence. My sister had been the most consistent visitor during the 2 weeks, and she had documented the visits with photographs that she had shared in the family group chat in the way that people share photographs of difficult situations when the sharing is a way of saying, we are here, and this is real, and this is what is happening. There were photographs from multiple dates, including November 14th and November 17th, and they showed my father in the Cleveland Clinic cardiac unit in his hospital bed in the specific environment of a cardiac care unit with the monitoring equipment and the hospital bed, and the specific quality of a room where someone is being kept carefully alive. The photographs were date-stamped by the phone's camera metadata. They showed what happened at Cleveland Clinic on November 14th. They showed it in the specific documentary way of a phone photograph, which is to say precisely and without any possibility of ambiguity about what was happening in the room. My father was in a hospital bed at Cleveland Clinic on November 14th. The photograph said so. The admission record said so. The deed said he was in Plain Township signing documents. 2 of those 3 things were true. The deed was not one of them. I want to tell you about the house in Plain Township and about the specific quality of what 27 years of a family's presence does to. I want to end with something about my father and about what he told me the first time I visited after the ruling. I had driven to Plain Township on a Saturday in late spring, and he had been in the garden when I arrived, and he had come in wiping his hands on a cloth with the specific ease of a person who has been doing something satisfying and who is glad to be interrupted by someone he is glad to see. He made coffee. We sat on the back porch and looked at the garden and the tree and the fence he had replaced in sections as it needed replacing. He said, "I have been thinking about the tree." He said, "It will outlast me, and that is fine, but I want someone who appreciates it to have the house when the time comes." He said, "I am working on the paperwork with my estate attorney." He said, "I want it to be clear." I said, "That is a good idea." He said, "Yes." He said, "I want the record to say exactly what I mean." He said, "I learned something about records in the past year." I said, "What did you learn?" He said, "The record is what remains after the person is no longer there to say what they meant." He said, "So the record should say what you mean while you are still there to make sure it does." I said, "That is right." He said, "Your mother always said I was a slow learner, but I got there eventually." I said, "Yes." I said, "You always get there." He handed me a coffee. We sat on the porch. The tree was full and good. The house was his. That is the whole story. A house. The house is a Cape Cod-style house built in the 1960s that my father had purchased when it had already been through 2 prior owners, and that he had improved steadily over the 27 years of his ownership. The improvements had the character of a person who does things correctly rather than quickly, who researches what is needed and does it well and does not return to it. The kitchen had been renovated in the mid-90s when my father had done much of the work himself with my oldest sister helping, and with the specific quality of a renovation that is done by someone who understands construction and who is willing to take the time to do it right. The basement had a workshop that my father had built over the years and that had the organized precision of someone who takes the tools and the work seriously. The yard had the garden beds and the fence and the tree that had been planted when the youngest sibling was born, and that is now 27 years old and substantial. And the center of the yard in the way that a tree becomes the center of a yard when it has had 27 years to become what it is. I want to say something about what physical impossibility means as a legal standard and why it is one of the most powerful categories of evidence in a property fraud case. Most evidence in a contested deed case is of the weighing kind. This document says one thing, this witness says another. These circumstances suggest fraud but do not prove it definitively. The trier of fact weighs the evidence and reaches a conclusion. Physical impossibility is different. When the evidence establishes that something could not have happened because the laws of physics or the facts of location prevent it, the weighing exercise has a different character. You are not asking whether the evidence suggests fraud. You are asking whether the alternative, that the deed is genuine, requires believing something that is physically impossible. The certified admission record established that Leonard was at Cleveland Clinic on November 14th. The deed claimed he was in Plain Township on November 14th. 140 miles separated those 2 locations. No one can be in 2 places simultaneously. The deed required the impossible. The records established the real. The court confirmed the real. I also want to tell you about the conversation I had with Sandra after the ruling and what she said about this specific category of deed fraud. She said cases where the deed is dated to a period of documented inpatient hospitalization are among the cleanest she handles because the evidence is produced by a third party with no interest in the outcome. The hospital is not a party to the litigation. The hospital's records were created contemporaneously with the events they document in the ordinary course of medical care by medical professionals who had no knowledge that the records would eventually be used as evidence in a property fraud case. The records exist because of the care my father received, not because of the fraud. Their accuracy is not a question of which side they were prepared to support. They are what they are. They say what they say. They say my father was admitted on November 8th and discharged on November 24th, and that he was present at Cleveland Clinic's cardiac unit throughout that period. There is no version of that record that is consistent with a deed executed in Plain Township on November 14th. Sandra said she had handled 4 cases in her 14 years with this specific pattern, a deed dated within a documented hospitalization period, and all 4 had been resolved in the same direction. She said the hospital record is conclusive. She said the court will not contort itself to reach a conclusion that requires the hospital record to be wrong. I want to say something about my father and about the specific quality of the conversation where he told me he thought he might change his will to give Owen more. He had said this in the way he says things that he has been thinking about carefully and that he is testing against my response. He had not done it because he had wanted to discuss it with his estate attorney first, and he had not made the appointment yet. I have thought about how close this came to being a different story. If he had made the appointment and changed the will before he found the deed in Owen's desk, the legal situation would have been more complicated, though the hospital records would still have established the same physical impossibility. But it might have taken longer, and it might have cost more, and the emotional weight of it might have been different. He found the deed by chance. He texted me because he was afraid, and because he trusted me. I had the professional background to understand immediately what the dates meant. The combination of those 3 things, the chance discovery, the trust he placed in me, and the training I had to read the timeline, was what made the response as fast and effective as it was. None of those 3 things was guaranteed. All 3 of them were present. The outcome was correct. I want to tell you about my father's retirement and about how he spends his time now that the house is securely his and the case is resolved. He is still planting the garden. He calls me on Tuesday evenings, which is the schedule we established after the cardiac event when we both understood that regular contact was a form of care and that the schedule made the care reliable. He tells me what he has been working on, and I tell him what I have been doing, and the conversations have the quality they have always had between us, which is the quality of 2 people who are genuinely interested in each other's lives and who understand that staying in contact is not a matter of obligation, but of affection. He mentioned the tree the last time we talked. He said it had a good year, and that the canopy was extending in the direction he had trained it, and that he thought it would be a significant tree when it was fully mature. He said he was glad it was still his to watch. I said yes. I said I am glad too. He said thank you again for what you did. I said you sent me the photograph. He said yes. He said you always know what to do with information. I said you taught me to pay attention. He said that is true. He said the garden is good this year. I said I will come see it in July. He said I will have things ready for you to take home. He always has things ready. The garden is always good. The house is his. That is the whole story. I also want to say something about Margaret Olson and about what happened with the notary fraud investigation. Margaret had reported the unauthorized use of her stamp to the Ohio Secretary of State's Notary Division within the week of being contacted by Sandra. The Secretary of State's office had opened an investigation. Margaret had cooperated fully. She had provided all documentation of her notarial acts showing that none of them corresponded to any deed involving Leonard or Owen or the Plain Township property. She had provided her notary log. She had provided her commission information. She was, as I said, a victim of a different aspect of the same fraud. She had done everything right, and her commission had been exploited by someone who had access to her commission information through the public records that the Ohio Secretary of State maintains for notaries. She told Sandra that she had become much more careful about the physical security of her notary stamp since the incident, and that she had reported the incident both to the state and to the Professional Association for Ohio Notaries. Cooperation with the investigation had been immediate and complete. She had nothing to do with what Owen had done. She had been used without her knowledge, and she had come forward without hesitation when she was asked. I want to end with something about the nature of records and about why the combination of hospital records and recorder's deed entries is specifically powerful in a case like this. The county recorder's deed entry is a public record that anyone can search. The hospital admission record is a private record that exists in a secure medical record system, and that can be obtained through the proper channels by the patient or by a court. The 2 systems have nothing to do with each other in ordinary circumstances. They are maintained by entirely different institutions for entirely different purposes. The county recorder preserves the chain of ownership for real property. The hospital preserves the record of medical care. When you search the recorder's index and find a deed dated November 14th, and you request the hospital records and find an admission from November 8th through November 24th, you have found the overlap between two independent record systems that were never designed to be used together, but that in this specific case are the two most important documents in the world. The recorder shows what was filed, the hospital shows where Leonard was. The space between those two records is the fraud. The distance between those two institutions is the proof.